Hello and welcome to the latest Jane's online intelligence briefing, focusing on global terrorism and insurgency trends. I'm Matthew Henman and I'm the head of Jane's Terrorism and Insurgency Centre. Today's session will include speakers from across the terrorism and insurgency team, covering the following topics. Firstly, Heather Nichol and Olivia Harper will examine top-level trends in terrorism and insurgency over the past 12 months. Then Alex Theodosiou and Gabriela Serrano will examine the broad threat posed by right-wing extremism in the UK and the US, followed by a brief examination of the current operational status of the Islamic State and discussion of future scenarios by myself. Chris Hawkins will conclude with an analysis and assessment of the eco-extremist group ITS. I'd like to highlight that all of the information used to compile today's presentation has been drawn from a variety of Jane's content, the Jane's Terrorism and Insurgency Centre, and the related militant propaganda analysis product. And that concludes my introduction.
Over the preceding 12 months, a total of 13,923 attacks by non-state armed groups worldwide were recorded from open sources by Jane's Terrorism and Insurgency Centre. These attacks resulted in a total of 14,720 non-militant fatalities. The number of attacks represented a moderate decrease of 15% in comparison to the preceding 12-month period, underlining a significant downturn that can largely be attributed to a major decrease in Islamic State violence following the final collapse of the group's territorial holdings in Iraq and Syria in November 2017. However, despite a decrease in the amount of attacks, the number of non-militant fatalities increased by 8% compared to the previous 12 months, partly driven by significant militant attacks in Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, and Mali.
Breaking the recorded data down by country produces some interesting results in comparison to the previous 12 months. With the exception of Afghanistan, the DRC, and Mali, there has been a decrease in attacks in the top 10 most violent countries, which reflects the general decline in global attacks recorded by JTIC. Although in recent years, Iraq has been typically one of the most violent countries, attacks and resulting fatalities continue to fall, with significant decreases of 43% and 49% respectively in the last 12-month period. This can be attributed to the Islamic State's territorial losses and increased counter-terrorism measures by security forces. Similarly, attacks and fatalities in Syria have dropped. Syria saw a smaller decrease of 20% in attacks this period, which reflects the reduction in militant capabilities to conduct fatal attacks owing to its loss of territory and the Syrian government's sustained control of territory. According to our recorded data, as illustrated on the graph, Afghanistan remains the most fatal country, with Syria ranking second. However, whilst maintaining its rank of second, Syria has seen a 41% decrease in fatalities compared to the preceding 12-month period.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Today I will be discussing the current state of far-right extremism in the UK. While Islamist-related terrorism still poses a greater threat, the risk of violent far-right activism has demonstrably grown in recent years. In July, the government announced that right-wing extremism would be included in its assessment for the terrorism threat level, indicating that security services now view this threat as distinct from Islamist or dissident Republican-related militancy. In assessing the threat posed by far-right groups and individuals, a degree of specificity and nuance is required to expose the various ideologies and methodologies that comprise the wider movement. The risk can be conceptualized as a three-tiered pyramid, with width representing the quantity of support and height representing the increasing violence of the actor's operational activity. While it is important to note that there is significant overlap and interaction between these tiers, this broadly encapsulates the scope of the threat. The first tier of this pyramid represents a broad base of individuals supportive of far-right ideas, predominantly centered on immigration and societal engagement with religious and ethnic minorities. Within this demographic are a number of organized groups that conduct rallies and marches to raise awareness for their causes, often by co-opting more mainstream issues of the day. Crucially, while these groups are not committed to violence, individuals associated with them have perpetrated far-right violence in the past or have links to more extreme groups further up the pyramid. The dominant ideological component within this milieu is British nationalism. Groups like Britain First and the English Defence League are stalwarts of this ideological strand of the far right, though they are past their popular peak as the complexion of the extreme right in the UK has changed in recent years. While a core British nationalism still underpins the worldview of many groups, Those that make this their defining feature have dwindled in significance in comparison to those that have embraced more transnational ideas, which leads to the other strong ideological focus of groups in this tier: European cultural nationalism. The risk posed by exponents of far-right ideology is heightened by the nature of the threat. Counterterrorism services have commented on the speed at which some individuals can radicalize in relative isolation. Darren Osborne, who killed one person and wounded 10 others when he drove a van into Muslim worshippers at London's Finsbury Park Mosque in June 2017, was reported to have radicalized in just 3 weeks, after seeking out posts written online by the aforementioned Tommy Robinson and Britain First. Moreover, it is lone actors that present the biggest threat, meaning that individuals such as Osborne may be rapidly propelled into a position of violent radicalization without a great deal of prior warning. At the pinnacle of the far-right pyramid are small groups, or disparate cells under a group's ideological umbrella, which espouse extreme ideologies. As mentioned, individuals or cells at this level can have ties lower down the pyramid, but clear distinctions separate these actors from the rest. Firstly, the ideologies of groups at this level are predicated explicitly upon the use of violence to achieve desired ends, with many groups adhering to neo-Nazism, which differs markedly from the modus operandi of the EDL and other such groups. Secondly, they are secretive, at times obsessively so, about their membership and activities, most unlike Tier 1 groups that rally and march. Thirdly, groups at this level are more likely to have both practical and ideological links to networks in other countries. Lastly, they often adopt nihilist and accelerationist worldviews.
Good evening. Today, I will cover the rise and threat of the extreme far right in the United States. Since November 2017, JTIC has recorded over 45 non-state group actions and attacks linked to the extreme far right across the United States. More specifically, the far right dominated the stage in 2018, being attributed to 93% of all events recorded that year in the country. Recent attacks, such as the Pittsburgh Synagogue and El Paso shootings, which collectively killed 33 people and wounded 31, have highlighted the rise of the movement. Other recent arrests and counterterrorism operations have shed light into some of the groups escalating this ideology, who will also address the threat of lone individuals and their capabilities. Far-right is an umbrella term used in the United States for a certain range of groups or ideologies and their subcultures, which include eco-fascists, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, anti-government militias, amongst others. The same nuance found in the term itself is reflected in its manifestation. In the United States, data derived from events recorded by JTIC shows that these attacks reflect anti-Semitic, anti-immigrant, Islamophobic, and racist sentiments prevalent within the extreme far right. In November 2019, the FBI released the Uniform Crime Reporting Program's annual hate crime statistics, stating that 60% of hate crimes reported were motivated by race, ethnicity, or ancestry bias, while 19% were motivated by religion. By lone individuals, groups such as Atomwaffen Division have gained mainstream notoriety. This is a white supremacist extremist organization and a proponent of accelerationism. The group, which follows a neo-Nazi ideology and is mainly comprised of white males, has suspected bases across the United States with affiliates in Canada, the UK, Austria, Germany, among others.
Thank you very much, Gabriella. We'll now turn to my section examining the current operational status of the Islamic State and scenario analysis. While claiming to maintain at least 12 distinct provinces, in addition to a broader network of aligned fighters and supporters across further territories, the reality is that the vast majority of Islamic State violence is concentrated in just 3 provinces. This is highlighted in the chart on screen, showing attacks in Iraq, Syria, and West Africa provinces as a proportion of all attacks conducted by the Islamic State worldwide. The 3 provinces have cumulatively never accounted for less than 84% of all recorded Islamic State attacks in any quarter since the third quarter of 2014. And since the beginning of 2018, this proportion averages more than 91%, rising to more than 94% in the third quarter of this year. This evident refocusing of operations from positional to insurgents manifested earlier in Iraq than in Syria, with all key territorial holdings recaptured by the security forces and allied militias by the end of 2017. Consequently, while attacks fell precipitously from late 2017 across early to mid-2018, quarterly attack totals have increased across each quarter of 2019 to date, likely underlining the group gaining an extent of momentum in its operations. These have largely focused on the small arms or IED assassinations of tribal and local leaders judged to have sided with the government against a group, in conjunction with a steady tempo of asymmetric attacks against the security forces and Iranian-backed militias. The Islamic State's West Africa province initially covered Nigeria, Cameroon, Niger, and Chad, following the Pledge of Allegiance to the Islamic State by Boko Haram, but in the past recent months has incorporated the activities of Islamic State forces operating more broadly in the Sahel region of North Africa. Furthermore, following the downturn of operational activity in Iraq and Syria, Islamic State operations in West Africa have become increasingly significant to the organisation as a whole. The tempo of West Africa province attacks decreased drastically through late 2015 and early 2016 as a consequence of the military intervention against the group in the Lake Chad region by the Multinational Joint Task Force. While thereafter violence rapidly returned to its previous peaks and has stayed relatively consistent, there have been notable shifts in the operational methods and approach of the province.
Since its formation in 2011, the nihilist environmental extremist group Individuals Tending Towards the Wild, known by its Spanish acronym ITS, has expanded beyond its country of origin, Mexico, and other countries in South America, including Chile, Argentina, and Brazil, to claim attacks in other countries such as the United States, UK, Spain, and Greece. Though these attacks were unlikely to have been directed by any central ITS command structure, they illustrated that through multilingual propaganda releases encouraging attacks internationally, that the ITS name may be used by individuals or small groups inspired by the group's misanthropic outlook.
This concludes today's briefing. Thank you very much for joining us. If you do have any questions that we've not been able to answer today, please do email them in to us at the address on the screen, which is janeintelbriefings@ihsmarket.com. One of our panelists will endeavour to get back to you with a written response. Thank you very much and goodbye.